Today, I will be reading Free Will Explained: How Science and Philosophy Converge to Create a Beautiful Illusion by Dan Barker. Forward. In 1985, the psychologist Benjamin Libet conducted a series of experiments that involved taking EEG readings of subjects' brains engaged in a task that required them to press a button at random intervals whenever they felt like it during the session. Results? Several seconds before the decision was consciously made by the subject, the brain motor cortex was activated. The neuroscientist John Dylan Haynes employed fMRI brain scans in a 2011 study in which subjects inside the scanner were instructed to press one of two buttons whenever they wanted while observing a series of random letters. The subjects were told to verbally report which letter was on the screen when they decided to press the button. Results? The time between brain activation and conscious awareness of a choice was several seconds, and in some cases a full 7 seconds. In these studies and others, scientists measuring subjects' brains know which decisions subjects would make before the subject themselves know it. That is spooky, and if these results don't bother you, then you're not thinking hard enough about them. What they imply is that we are not free to choose in the way we think we are. We feel free, but that's just what our conscious selves believe because they don't know about the inputs feeding into them from below that have already made the choice. As a neuroscientist, Sam Harris articulated it in his widely read book, Free Will. Our wills are simply not of our own making. Thoughts and intentions emerge from background causes of which we are unaware and over which we exert no conscious control. We do not have the freedom we think we have. The principle of determinism holds that every event in the universe has a prior cause. If all effects have causes, including human thoughts and actions, then where in the causal chain does the act of choice enter? Even if there were a mini-me up there calling the shots, his little brain would have to be just as determined as my big brain. So for mini-me to have free will, he would have to have a mini-me inside of him pulling his strings, and mini-me would himself need an itty-bitty mini-me inside of his brain. Ad infinitum. And if you believe in souls, this fails in the same way as mini-me does. A soul inside of you pulling your strings does not grant you freedom. It just means the soul is in control. And having a soul would mean that there's a mini-soul inside the soul directing its actions and so forth. It would seem that if determinism is true, then we do not have free will. And yet, we feel free. We feel like we make choices. Here lies the problem, which helps explain the results of a 2009 survey of 3,226 philosophy professors and grad students asked to weigh in on 30 different subjects of concerns in their field, from a prior knowledge, aesthetic value, and God to knowledge, mind, and moral realism. On the topic of free will, compatibilism, libertarianism, or no free will, the survey found the following results. Accept or lean to compatibilism, 59.1%. Other, 14.9%. Accept or lean toward libertarianism, 13.7%. And accept or lean toward no free will, 12.2%. By far, the majority of professional philosophers hold the position that free will and determinism are compatible. Now, from a scientific perspective, it shouldn't matter how many people support one or the other position. Only the quality of evidence and arguments should matter. As Einstein said in response to a 1931 book skeptical of the relativity theory titled 100 Authors Against Einstein, why 100? If I were wrong, one would have been enough. But there is something revealing about these figures, and that is this. If the most qualified people to assess a problem are not in agreement on an answer, and the free will/determinism problem has been around for thousands of years, it may be that it is an insoluble one. For example, is it really reasonable for the 12.2% of philosophers who are determinists to conclude that 59.1% of their professional colleagues are simply wrong in taking the compatibilism position? Isn't it more likely that the issue comes down to language and what is meant by the terms free will and determinism? This is what I strongly suspect, and in my book, The Moral Arc 1, worked out how accepting a determined universe does not prelude retaining free will and moral responsibility through 4 compatibilist workarounds. 1. Modular mind. Even though a brain consists of many neural networks in which one network may make a choice that another network finds about later, they are still operating in a single brain. 2. Free won't. Vetoing competing impulses and choosing one thought or acting over another. 3. Choice is part of the causal net, wherein our volition acts are part of the determined universe but are still our choices. 4. Degrees of moral freedom, a range of choice options varying by degrees of complexity in the numbers of intervening variables. Dan Barker's poignantly argued and beautifully presented case for harmonic freedom and social free will gels beautifully with my own and other cases for how we can be free in a determined universe. Barker is one of our finest minds and most effective activists for atheism, and as a former preacher and theist, he knows the necessity of making the case for moral freedom as well if we are to refute the calumny that atheists have no morality because we don't believe in moral responsibility. If we're not free, then we can't be held responsible for our actions. Barker's harmonic free will succinctly presented in the tightly reasoned book does not deny the scientific reality of determinism, but it does engage us as humans in the social process of being responsible for our choices while interacting with other humans. In so doing, Barker has essentially eliminated the problem of free will and determinism. There is really nothing to resolve. I had on occasion to elaborate on this problem during a 2016 episode of Dave Rubin's talk show, in which he asked me my opinion of Sam Harris's seemingly airtight case for determinism. I suggested the following thought experiment. Suppose a hard determinist were to have a one-night stand while on the road and his wife found out. How does he account for his actions? Does he, paste the explanation for generic human behavior in Sam's book, say something like this to his wife? Honey, my will is simply not of my own making. My thoughts and intentions emerge from the background causes of which I am unaware and over which I exert no conscious control. I do not have the freedom you think I have. Could he have even finished the thought before the stinging slap of a hand across his face terminated the rationalization? If free will is the power to do otherwise, both the determinist and his wife know that, of course, he could have done otherwise, and she reminds him that should those circumstances arise again, he damn well better make the right choice, or else. The act to choose to do the right thing, or the wrong thing, is what most of us mean by free will. In this sense, I strongly suspect that deep down Sam and everyone else are compatibilists. And except for those extreme cases of mental illness, chemical addiction, or brain damage, we all have this type of freedom. Our choices may be part of the determined causal net of the universe, but they are still our choices that we make, and we should be held accountable for them. Michael Shermer. Introduction. Free will is dead. Long live free will. We need a new way of talking about free will. After centuries of debate, we are nowhere close to a consensus. Many scientists inform us we don't have free will, but many philosophers assure us we do. Some people say, I don't know what you're talking about. Others say, who cares? Since you are reading this book, you likely care. Like me, you wonder what sense we make of morality, law, or meaning if everything is mechanically predetermined. If we don't have free will, how can we talk about responsibility, guilt, innocence, justice, mercy, forgiveness, praise, self-esteem, dignity, creativity, or, if you are religious, sin and righteousness? Although scientific determinism appears to rule it out, free will continues to feel like an obvious part of our existence. So we have a paradox. We know that our lives are determined by impersonal laws of nature, yet we act like free personal agents. Is that a contradiction? While science proves we are not ultimately responsible for our decisions, we continue to think and act like we are immediately responsible. The biologist Richard Dawkins acknowledged the perplexity. I have a materialist view of the world. I think that things are determined in a rational way by antecedent events. That commits me to the view that when I think I have free will, when I think that I'm exercising free choice, I'm deluding myself. My brain states are determined by physical events, and yet that seems to go against the very powerful subjective impressions that we do have free will. Yes, I have free will, Christopher Hitchens quipped. I have no choice but to have it. Scientists and philosophers have been battling with this issue for at least 2,000 years. There are hundreds of books and articles about it. The Oxford Handbook of Free Will has 600 pages and looks more like an encyclopedia than a handbook. As the theology, a subject with no object, the subject of free will creates an octopus of opinions. So maybe something is wrong with our approach. I want to suggest a different way of looking at it. I'm going to propose an understanding of free will that turns it sideways and it makes the paradox disappear. If we can view the world more like jazz musicians than classical musicians, we will see that we will see free will as a beautiful improvisation of the human species. I call it harmonic free will. No matter what your opinion is, you feel like you are free. As you are reading this paragraph, you certainly don't think you are coerced by forces outside your control to continue to the next sentence, unless this required reading for a class you don't like. You are not a robot. Your friends and loved ones are not machines. Science and philosophy should explain our experience, not deny it. So there are two questions. Do I have free will? And why do I feel like I do? I will address each independently. These questions reside at different logical levels. They are like melody and harmony, which do not compete but rather cooperate to create beauty. To be clear, I am certain that classical free will, as traditionally understood, is a fiction. The scientists are right. We can't rise above nature to violate cause and effect. In affirming philosophical free will, jazz, instead of scientific free will, classical, I am not dismissing determinism. Identifying free will becomes a matter of perspective, not of physical proof. Free will is not a scientific truth, it is a social truth. The only thing that can contradict determinism is indeterminism. Since free will, as I see it, is not indeterministic, it poses no challenge to science. Using a pivoting two-dimensional view instead of only a flat deterministic or top-down transcendent definition, we will see that free will fits nicely with cause and effect. I know that hard determinists will be skeptical of yet another attempt to salvage free will, but they shouldn't worry. Harmonic free will actually underscores the strength of their scientific arguments. It also underscores ethics. I am not a professional philosopher or scientist. I used to be a Christian minister who preached about souls and spirits. I believed in God. I thought I had supernatural free will. When I read that Moses exhorted the Israelites to choose life so you and your descendants may live, Deuteronomy 30:19. I believe that each individual, created in God's image, possessed a transcendent liberty to make a personal decision for eternal life. I now dismiss that dogma as incoherent and coercive. Free will is not transcendent. Like music, it is transient. While playing jazz piano, which is a lot more fun than preaching, I approach music from two different angles. Like classical musicians, I rely on the formal but bottom-up training of sight reading and technique. But as a jazz improviser, I try to rise above all that, without ignoring it, and freely create from a top-down frame of reference. When you invert the scene, you can see, or hear, that music is not linear or mechanical. It produces something greater than the sum of its parts. It can come alive. Like music, I think free will and consciousness also come alive. When we flip perspective, we suddenly experience the world and ourselves from a vibrant and creative vantage point. You don't have to be an expert or to notice that the experts disagree about free will. Some of them are like feuding theologians. I'm staying out of that boxing match. I will not try to solve the problem. I am suggesting that there is no problem in the first place. There is no need to deliver a knockout punch. There is no right answer. By stepping outside the ring and looking at it from a fresh angle, from a jazz angle, we can make the whole debate disappear. To accomplish this optical illusion or acoustical illusion, vanishing act, I read that wrong. To accomplish this optical illusion or acoustical illusion, vanishing act, I am going to tell some stories and introduce a number of analogies and models, or intuition pumps, as philosopher Daniel C. Dennett might call them, many of which may seem at first unrelated. Since I am a jazz pianist, my central metaphor will be music. I am calling it harmonic free will, but other kinds of artists might call it aesthetic free will. If you are a writer, you might dub it poetic free will. Whatever you call it, you are blending more than one way of looking at the world. All analogies become strained if you push them too hard. They don't prove anything by themselves. We should never argue by analogy. but we can certainly illustrate by analogy. The following illustrations are aimed at picturing how free will can be meaningful without being an object of quantifiable measurement. If we look straight at it, we don't see it. We have to sneak up on it laterally. Chapter 1. Little One. In early summer 2014, I started working on my book, God, the Most Unpleasant Character in All Fiction. I got up early to write during those magical quiet hours before leaving for work. The project took more than a year, spanning 2 summers. I usually work where I can look out into the backyard. Cardinals, robins, sparrows, finches, wrens, and other Midwestern birds drop by the feeder in a rather secluded area behind our home in the west side of Madison, Wisconsin. In late June, a chipmunk appeared on the step outside the French door. It seemed to be staring at me through the glass. I smiled and said, "Hey there, little one." This continued a few more days. One morning, I put some almonds on the step. A couple of minutes later, the tiny creature came and picked one up. Instead of stuffing its cheeks like it does now, it just posed there, munching the treat with obvious enjoyment. The cute little animal turned the nut around with its minuscule mammalian fingers, nibbling the edges like a toddler with a cookie. It brought a smile to my face. During evening hours and weekends, I often spent time reading in the hammock, or in our small backyard, my idea of heaven on earth. One day, I spotted the chipmunk moving in the borders of the yard. I said, "Hey there, little one," and tossed an almond onto the grass. It stood still for 5 or 6 seconds. Then, instead of running towards the nut, it flitted off in another direction. It wandered among the shrubs, journeyed to the fence on the other side of the yard, stuck its nose in the dirt under the bird feeder, and disappeared under the yew trees. I assumed it hadn't noticed the nut, but after a moment it reappeared and zeroed in on the prize. Why did it act like that? It seems the optimal plan would be to head straight for the food, like a dog would, instead of zigzagging like a cartoon character. Its skittering behavior is undoubtedly due to a conflict of survival instincts, to eat or not to be eaten. That is the question. However, since the creature did find its way pretty quickly to the almond, it must have remembered where it fell. That little rodent appears to have keenly evolved grasp of territory, a good memory, a strong sense of smell, and prudent strategy of marshalling resources. It needs to survive the moment as well as the coming winter. I miss my little friend during the cold months. As the leaves fell and snow piled up and the calendar flipped to 2015, I pictured it burrowing snugly next to obscenely large cache of almonds, walnuts, and peanuts, and the occasional overpriced Whole Foods pistachio. Our friends resumed the next spring. It was an exciting moment when the wild animals dared to come close enough to snatch an almond right from my fingers. I breathed out an involuntary chuckle of joy with that first physical contact. Seeing its tiny hands, feet, nose, teeth, curious eyes, and obvious relish for the same food I eat confirmed that we are relatives. I looked it up. Humans and chipmunks are approximately 17 millionth cousins. By comparison, the cardinals at our feeder are about 175 millionth cousins. The kinship is distant, but real. Somewhere back in history, we had a common ancestor. Little one got bolder as the weeks passed. One afternoon, while I was reading on our Adirondack rocker, Adirondack, and these motherfuckers, it hopped onto my foot, later climbing right up my leg to grab the almond in my hands. That was fun! Another winter came and went. In the spring of 2016, we re-landscaped our yard. The back step was replaced with a small deck. Grass became a stone patio. Earth was regarded and shrubs were planted. I was afraid that the disruption would drive off my friends. I can now sit out on the new deck to read and write. A couple of days after the landscape has left, I saw a familiar little face peeking over the first step. "Hey there, little one," I said. "You're still here." It looked at me, and then climbed tentatively to look to the deck level. Seeing a nut in my finger, the chipmunk cautiously advanced, then turned and hid behind a post. Peeked around, came closer, and backed off. Circling the deck, it came up behind the coffee table. When I moved my foot, it zipped across the patio into the yew trees. A moment later, it reappeared on the other side, peering around the leg of the other chair. I could see its dilemma, struggling between fear and desire. During moments like this, it sure looks like its tiny brain is making a conscious choice. Poised at the point of indecision, its behavior appeared to betray an internal conflict of values. It wanted to take a risk. It wanted to flee to safety. It seemed to have the liberty to choose. It looked like it had free will. It most certainly doesn't. If by free will you mean the ability to escape pre-existing cause and effect, then that creature can't possibly have it. Its actions are determined by the laws of nature, not by any liberty that transcends those laws. The instincts and neurological reactions in the rodent's evolved brain have predetermined its decisions and actions with causal anecdotes to the beginning of the universe. The animal did not choose to be born. It did not decide to be a chipmunk. The instincts that drive its behavior were chosen not by itself, but by its ancestors who happened to survive due to those naturally selected traits. It is not deciding to be afraid. It is certainly not freely arranging the neurotransmitters and inhibitors that cause the various modules in its naturally adapted brain to produce signals that encourage or hamper its actions. That creature and its characteristics are simply the result of the impersonal process of evolution. But it's cute. It's alive. It peers at me curiously. I smile and say, "Hey there, little one," and congratulate it for its courage. I talk to it as though it has free will. Something above and beyond the dry laws of nature seems to be happening. Oh, sorry, I read that wrong too. Something above and beyond the dry laws of nature seem to be happening when we look at each other. It's not supernatural. It's emergent. You've had the same feelings, I'm sure. There's something magical about being alive. After a couple of minutes, the brave animal came to the almond. Within a few days, the little one was climbing my leg again. It briefly perches on my lap now, grateful for the free lunch. While I'm out in the hammock, it climbs onto my belly and chest with little fear. We are old friends. That animal may not have free will, but I judge it as if it does. Chapter 2. What is free will? There is a wide disagreement on the definition of free will. Some people have dogmatic feelings that parallel theological warfare. Guys, it's theological. I figured it out. From the beginning. Some people have dogmatic feelings that parallel theological warfare. Wow, okay. Many people with deep religious faith feel threatened by the topic because it affects the ideas of sin, salvation, and eternal life. Some Christians believe that the death of Jesus would be meaningless if we didn't have the freedom to confess our sins and accept the gift of salvation. Few philosophers or scientists are that melodramatic. Even if you deny free will, you need to describe what you are denying. Is it a property or characteristic? Is it a power? Is it a feeling? Is it a personal essence of a transcendent soul? Are humans the only animals with free will? Can you have free will if you are not physically free? What exactly do we want to be free from? Philosophers disagree on these questions. Daniel C. Dennett writes about the varieties of free will worth wanting, which suggests it does not have a universal definition. However, it seems most philosophers and scientists usually define free will as the ability to do otherwise. You bought a chocolate ice cream cone instead of a strawberry cone. Even though you didn't choose to be born, you didn't pick your parents, genetic makeup, environmental influences, psychological predispositions, traits, talents, intellectual or athletic abilities, desires, phobias, or medical problems, and you didn't decide how the neurons fire and rearrange in your naturally evolved brain or create any of the causes that led to your selection. You still feel as if you had the choice, if you had the freedom to choose strawberry, even though this time you didn't. You believe you could have done otherwise. You don't consider yourself a puppet manipulated by the inexorable forces of nature. If you thought you were coerced to choose, you might feel more like a slave than a free agent. Why did you choose the chocolate? Because I wanted to. Why did you want to? I like chocolate. Don't you also like strawberry? Yes, but at the moment I prefer chocolate. Why do you like chocolate? It tastes good. Why does it taste good? I don't know. It must be something in my brain or taste buds. That's the kind of person I am. Why are you the kind of person you are? I was born that way. Why did that happen? Because of genetics and random DNA recombination. What? Because of genetics and random DNA recombination after my parents had sex, and because of environmental factors. And what caused those causes? The laws of physics and natural selection. Are those laws personal or impersonal? They are impersonal because they are impersonal cause and effect. So the personal was caused by the impersonal. That's what it looks like. Could it have turned out differently? Not with the exact same array of causes. Why did you prefer chocolate at that moment? I don't know. Maybe because I had strawberry last week. Or maybe because the store is famous for its chocolate. So your preference for chocolate at the exact moment was predetermined? Yes, and I would have made no other choice if the situation were identical. What if a bird distracted you and someone else ordered the last chocolate cone? Then that would not have been the identical situation. So you could not have chosen differently. It feels like I could have chosen strawberry. I certainly had the freedom and the power and saw no obstacle to that choice. But I can't violate cause and effect. So you don't actually have free will? That's what it looks like. That is exactly what it looks like if free will... What? Okay, hold on, you guys. That is exactly what it looks like if free will means the ability to do otherwise. But is that what it has to mean? Maybe there's a different way of talking about free will. Interesting. What is determinism? There seems to be more agreement about the definition of determinism. In earlier times, the word necessity was used. The 5th century BCE philosopher Leucippus, who may have been the first Greek to deduce that everything reduces to atoms, said, "Nothing occurs at random, but everything for a reason by necessity." I like necessity because it is impersonal. Since determinism comes from determine, some might think it means everything is a result of intelligent purpose. That is indeed what it means to Calvinists. I know, O Lord, that the way of human beings is not in their control, that mortals as they walk cannot direct their steps. Jeremiah 10:23. In their hearts humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. Proverbs 16:9. The Bhagavad Gita says, "The Supreme Lord is situated in everyone's heart, and is directing the wanderings of all living entities, who are seated as on a machine." Some numbers. The Quran agrees, "Nothing can befall us except what God decrees." 9:51. I hope I pronounced all of those right. Few philosophers or scientists are that fatalistic. Oh, I have to Google that one. Hold on. Fatalistic. What do you guys think it means? Leave it in the comments below. Like, comment, subscribe. Let's see, what was it? Fatalistic. Adjective. Relating to or characteristic of the belief that all events are predetermined and therefore inevitable. In use, many have an almost Many have an almost fatalistic attitude toward their own health. Okay, so it's just a weird way of saying free will. Or I guess the process of free will. Determinism, sorry. The process of determinism. Oh boy. This is going to be a bumpy ride. Few philosophers or scientists are ever that fatalistic. Oh, fatalistic, like fate. God damn it. Determinism is simply the idea that all events are the necessary results of previous impersonal causes. Philosopher Michael McKenna says determinism is the thesis that the facts of the past and the laws of nature entail one unique future. If all events arise from impersonal natural causes, then human decisions arise from impersonal natural causes. Some say determinism rules out free will. Others say there is, therefore, no moral responsibility. No matter what you do, you can say, "The universe made me do it." That's why this topic is so important. We want to say, you are responsible, not the universe. Determinism is one of those words that fall prey to equivocation. At the subatomic level, it means one thing, but as the biological level, which some call manifest reality, it means something else. At the quantum level, everything is a matter of probability. The state of any quark is not caused. It just happens randomly. Let's call this microdeterminism. The biological level and the manifest reality where we live our lives determines... Fuck, man. I got this. At the biological level, in the manifest reality where we live our lives, describes large-scale effects from large-scale causes. Newtonian physics deals with the properties of a huge collection of atoms and molecules, such as animals, rivers, storms, germs, baseballs, satellites, brains, tribes, etc., that none of the individual quarks or atoms has. That's an entirely different use of the word. Let's call that macrodeterminism. Microdeterminism is an open question. Since everything appears to be probabilistic and uncertain at the subatomic level, an effect can never be predicted from any particular state, at least not without our current model of physics. Einstein didn't like that idea, which is why he said, God does not play dice with the universe. He didn't actually believe in God, and he was using two poetic metaphors. Subatomic particles are not dice, and nobody's rolling them. However, quantum physics proves Einstein wrong. It appears that randomness and uncertainty are built into the fabric of reality at that level. In any event, I don't think it matters if microdeterminism is true or false. Free will gains nothing from randomness. Macrodeterminism, on the other hand, is manifestly true. As biological organisms, our lives are built on the laws of cause and effect. At the level of animals and brains, not subatomic particles, we look for macrodeterministic causes. When I ask what causes my decision, I point to quirks. I do not point to quirks. I look for the things that are I look for the things that are capable of making a macro change. Items like wind, asteroid, viruses, or brains. We can't always pinpoint the exact causes of our decisions, but I don't think that matters. Not knowing what caused something does not equate to it not being caused and not being determined. Jonathan M.S. Pierce writes, You don't have to be a philosopher to ask, if everything is determined, how can we have free will? But you can also ask, if nothing is determined, how can we have free will? Just about everyone agrees that there is impersonal cause and effect in the universe. You, like my chipmunk friend, are the result of material, biological processes mainly outside of your control. Therefore, you are determined to some degree. No matter what your opinion is about free will, you cannot deny determinism. Science seems to show that macrodeterminism is unavoidable. You really could not have done otherwise. Some experiments appear to demonstrate that your decisions are made before you are consciously aware of them. As Michael Shermer describes in the foreword, Benjamin Libet's EEG studies puts them at about half a second earlier. More recent fMRI studies suggest as many as 10 to 15 seconds. Your actions are all predetermined by unconscious natural causes before you are aware of them. Therefore, according to science, you do not have free will. But some philosophers and scientists disagree. Philosopher Alfred Male, in his insightful book, Free, Why Science Hasn't Disproved Free Will, throws considerable doubt on the findings and interpretations of these studies. Philosopher Mark Balaguer, in Free Will, does the same thing in a different way. But I don't think it matters. I don't think free will requires consciousness. The only thing that requires consciousness is the feeling of free will. We all understand there are time lags in the brain. It makes microseconds for photons hitting retinas to trigger neurons in the visual cortex, produce an image that is compared with remembered patterns and recognized. It takes time for any thought to happen. Why should we be concerned that it takes milliseconds, most of it unconscious, for any decision we make to loop around and become an object of conscious awareness? I'm often surprised when I glance at a watch or clock that the first movement of the second hand seems to take more than a second. It looks frozen for at least 1.5 seconds before it moves. This seems to fit with Libet's finding. It is spooky. The illusion also happens with digital clocks. I wonder if anyone else experiences this. But despite the weird phenomenon, I realize time is not stopped. The misperception has something to do with my brain taking the time to register what is happening. I can't pause the clock at will. This freezing of time only happens when I'm caught off guard. But I would never imagine, as a few scientists do, that this shifting of consciousness proves I don't have free will. My unconscious mind is just as much a part of who I am as my conscious mind. I think hard determinists who rely on scientific experiments to separate decision-making from consciousness may be engaging in a kind of materialistic dualism, the very thing they essentially preach against. They seem to be positing a natural ghost in the machine, and they assume that we have a concrete consciousness, C, at a concrete point in time, T, making a concrete decision, D, based on a concrete experience, E. In reality, all of these can be spread out and fuzzy. Consciousness is not a thing. It is a kind of consensus, the feeling of free will, page 71. What? I'm not sure what he's referencing in that last sentence. Let's move on. We don't ever experience anything in real time. Reality to us is always history. Experience is not out there. We are a part of the experience itself. Decisions are not dispensed from one unique control cockpit in the brain. The whole process is more like an electron cloud than a hard particle. More like democracy than dictatorship. Instead of trying to locate free will on a linear sequence like T, E, C, D, I think we should look at it globally. Sometimes it's like ETDC, or CEDT, or TCDE, or some other anagram of reality, or all possible permutations depending on your frame of reference. Classical musicians play the notes, jazz musicians make it up. Decisions don't always require consciousness or free will. All animals make decisions. Before we humans make any decisions, we may have a feeling of freedom, but there is no essence of freedom. As we will see below, free will only becomes a question after the decision results in behavior that is judged. One more time. I need to reread that. As we will see below, free will only becomes a question after the decision results in a behavior that is judged. Oh. And what does after mean? The idea or feeling that time is moving, that it has a direction, past, present, future, is an emergent reality. Many scientists claim that the arrow of time makes no sense at the quantum level. Nothing determines anything at all. Reality at any moment simply happens to be in a state that has anecdote and successive states. When we say that 7 follows 6, we don't mean that 7 is caused by 6. Determinism only makes sense in the manifest reality, accessible to biological organisms at the level where entropy is increasing, which is what gives us impression that time has a direction, and therefore some events cause other events. That same entropy is what allows us to be functioning, i.e. living beings, and to be functioning living beings in the first place. At the subatomic level, there is no before-after determinism. There's only probability. So if hard determinists who deny free will are basing their arguments on quantum state causing the next state, their premise is faulty. If determinism is simply what happens happens, what is a tautology that explains nothing? That is a tautology that explains nothing. While macro determinism is certainly true because of entropy, determinism can't be true in an ultimate sense because every macro cause is itself an effect. A first cause would have been a first effect. That is incoherent. A prime mover or creator God is a meaningless concept that simply begs the question. There can't be an absolute cause of anything, but there are certainly immediate causes. We have to specify a stopping point or beginning point, approximate cause, a sufficient explanation, and be satisfied with that. We also have to identify a frame of reference. At the biological level, macro determinism, cause and effect itself is an emergent property of the manifest reality in which we live, the only reality in which determinism is meaningful. I know this sounds fuzzy. I have trouble wrapping my mind around it. In a few pages I will describe harmonic free will, which will hopefully bring it into focus. Now, think of it roughly like this. You are an animal whose behavior is determined by the laws of nature, but after you act, your mind retroactively loops around and judges that you were free. I'm going to be honest. I probably have to reread all this again because trying to read it out loud does make it harder to understand what I'm reading. But I hope you guys are having fun. Let's see what we got. this short little chapter right here called False Dichotomy. Dichotomy. Oh, probably dichotomy. Okay. Had to give it a few tries. False dichotomy. Here we go. People who argue about free will typically fall into three camps. Until recently, I found myself in the middle of the three. On one side are the determinists who insist that since nothing can interfere with materialistic cause and effect, we are not free to choose our actions. On the other side are the libertarians, not to be confused with the political libertarians, who believe we possess a liberty that transcends the laws of nature, giving us some degree of creative freedom that makes us morally accountable for our decisions. That is classical free will. In the middle are the compatibilists who, for various reasons, claim we can define our terms in ways that make both sides meaningful. Hard determinists and libertarians are often called incompatibilists. Those labels are an oversimplification. Some hard determinists agree that we are morally accountable even if we are not free because moral accountability is also predetermined. Some libertarians are dualists, insisting that there is a reality beyond the physical world, such as immaterial mind, soul, or other incorporeal essence, that offers personal liberty over impersonal determinism. Other libertarians think some degree of freedom is built into the laws of nature, perhaps due to the randomness of quantum mechanics. Many believers in a supernatural world claim we possess libertarian free will that makes our eternal souls accountable not just to society, but also to cosmic judgment. While scientists tend to lean toward hard determinism, most philosophers tend to be compatibilists, as Michael Shermer shows in the foreword, asserting that although everything is indeed determined, free will is still meaningless. Most non-philosophers likewise seem to be intuitively compatibilists. Philosopher Eddie Namaes and colleagues have conducted various experimental philosophy studies showing that roughly 2/3 of people, when confronted with the deterministic nature of the universe, still claim that humans have free will and are morally responsible. The finding doesn't prove free will. But it does show that determinism does not seem to be much of a threat to freedom. Most of us feel that our decisions are still going through us, not around us, as if we were bystanders watching the race cars. Most of us feel that our decisions are still going through us, not around us, as if we were bystanders watching the race cars of cause and effect drive by. For years, I've considered myself a compatibilist because I think it is possible to talk about free will even if it can't be located in the physics of subatomic particles or firing neurons. I thought hard determinists were defining free will too narrowly. I now think that determinist-libertarian divide is a false dichotomy. Although most compatibilists state that there is no irresolvable conflict between determinism and free will, I think the whole idea of a conflict is itself incoherent. There is no conflict because there is no middle. It makes no sense to talk about the two sides coming together, as if they were separated along a straight line, like a game of tug-of-war. They aren't sides, they are dimensions. Is there a middle between width and height? Both determinism and free will can be embraced meaningfully, not because they can be hammered into compatibility by tinkering with terms, but because they are addressing entirely different concepts at different logical levels. If we coerce them to a continuum, we are comparing apples and oranges. We are setting up a fake boxing match. We can step outside the fight. The real battle is not between determinism and free will. It's between deterministic and indeterminism. Free will, in my opinion, is not indeterministic, so it can't be incompatible with determinism. Since it's a phony divide, it makes no sense to say that determinism and free will are compatible or incompatible. They are acompatible. So I guess I am really an acompatibilist. This will certainly amount to the same thing as a compatibilist in the minds of the strict incompatibilist. But since I think the debate is bogus, I am simply asking, where's the beef? Mark Balaguer says that the trick is not to fall into the trap of trying to argue that compatibilism is false. The trick is to argue instead that it's irrelevant. That even if it's true, it simply doesn't matter. Yes, and it doesn't matter because there are no sides to defend. You can't pit one logical level against another logical level. So, I suppose he's trying to say to stop looking at free will like it's two different things, but instead talk about it as one thing? Well, I don't know. Leave in the comments what you guys think and like and subscribe. Or don't. Next chapter. Logical levels. Suppose you beat me in a game of chess by offering your queen oh fuck. I've been reading for a minute, you guys. Give me a break here. Suppose you beat me in a game of chess by offering your queen in a brilliant sacrificial combination that ends in a smothered checkmate. You sit back with satisfaction, expecting me to congratulate you for your excellent play, but I say, there's no such thing as a checkmate. You laugh and point to the board. Your king has no move. You lost the game. No, I didn't. Now I see wooden pieces on a subdivided square. Where's the checkmate? Look with your eyes. Where can your king move? How can an inanimate object move? Inanimate object. A piece of wood is what he's saying. All I see are stationary figures made of subatomic particles held together by the force of quarks behaving according to quantum probabilities. Those material objects don't have the inner force or freedom to move anywhere. Where's the checkmate? Chess does not reduce to what the pieces are made of, you patiently explain. Chess is a mental game. You don't find a checkmate in molecules or the laws of physics. Checkmate is not a thing, it is a concept. So you admit that there is no such thing as checkmate. But you agreed to the rules of chess before we started the game. What is an agreement? I continue. What are rules? What is a game? And so on. The silly argument could ramble forever, with no resolution. My transparent refusal to admit defeat is a change of subject, a foul philosophical obfuscation. Obfuscation. I wonder what that means. Obfuscate. That's a weird one. Obfuscate. Verb. Render obscure, unclear, or unintelligible. Okay, that makes sense. It obstinately misses the point. We are talking about chess at different logical levels, and if we insist on arguing horizontally where the separation is vertical, the debate will dissolve into equivocation and category error. We will never come to an agreement because there can't be an agreement. The dispute is artificial. I think this is what is happening in the free will debate. Both positions are defensible, not because the two sides can be made compatible, but because there are no sides. Do we have free will? Asked Martin E. P. Seligman. Do we have free will? Ask Martin E. P. Seligman, Peter Railton, Roy F. Baumeister, and Chandra Sripada in their groundbreaking book Homo Prospectus. We believe that this metaphysical debate has reached a stalemate. They are right, but I don't think stalemate is the right word. At a stalemate, the game is over. Perhaps impasse is a better word. A chess game is played horizontally between two opponents at the same logical level. But determinism and free will are not opponents facing each other across a board. They don't inhabit the same logical level. We can't ask if they are compatible. They are acompatible. It's like asking if a banana is compatible with forgiveness. Interesting. Very interesting. Alright, boyos, I'm leaving it here. I'm tired. I've been reading for a long time. I hope you enjoyed the game. I'll hopefully make a part 2 of this. We'll see. Anyways, I'll continue where we left off next time. Like and subscribe and whatever else you're supposed to do.